Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the swarm of locusts. With today's episode, we're going to take this deep within the darkness and try to unravel the mystery of 5 men who unfortunately committed suicide and drowned themselves. With me today is Dark Owl Stories. Be sure to check out her channel and show her some love. She puts on a kick-ass Australian accent in this one. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Old Skin Locust over here would butcher this story putting on an accent. So let's not even attempt that shit. A link to Dark Owl Stories channel can be found in the comments. So, with all of that out of the way, let's dive right in, shall we? My name is Carl West, and I used to be a reporter for the Sunshine Coast Daily. On Valentine's Day of 2013, 5 men drowned themselves in the ocean. All of them unrelated, unbeknownst to each other. All of them appearing to have committed suicide between 5:30 a.m. and 6 a.m. How and why they did what they did is still unknown. While suffering ends for those that commit suicide, the pain continues for those they have left behind. They say that a person has 2 deaths, one for when they die and another for the last time somebody says their name. In an unpublished article I wrote for the Sunshine Coast Daily, I aim to put the spotlight on those that continue on living with the memory of their passing. The Parisian Drownings by Carl West. Mary Reed's apartment lies on the upper floors of an apartment complex overlooking the harbor. Through her window, the Sydney Opera House is in full view, like white eggshells nuzzling the blue sky. We sit in the kitchen as she waits for the kettle to boil. Mary Reed is the widow of Eric Reed, one of the 5 victims of the Parisian drownings. Aged 35, she is now engaged to Albert Einhart, a system administrator for the CBD company. She is dressed as if she is ready for a run. She smiles brightly as she hands me a cup of coffee. So, can you tell us about Eric? What was he like?
Oh wow, Eric. Eric was just this carefree, happy-go-lucky guy, you know? Just your typical coasty bloke, really. He loved the surf, loved going out in the bush, loved getting out there and enjoying nature, and he was super sweet. Really sweet. We met at this, I think it was a house party in Richmond. First time I saw him, he was trying to dance to this Crowded House song, and he just flicks the lights off, goes to me and says, "You're cute, let's dance." He had this really terrible haircut, and he was kind of goofy looking. But for some reason I said yes. Anyway, it started from there. He dragged me to the dance floor, and then he dragged me on a road trip around Australia. And then he dragged me to have a life on the Sunshine Coast.
Okay. How would you characterize your marriage with him?
He was really good for the first couple of years, you know? We had a good place, had a nice circle of friends. But after a while, things got a bit cold. I think it was the city girl in me. I'm used to living in dense, packed places, and suddenly there's all this space and all this time and all this quiet. It never got bad though. Sure, I was unhappy, but it never was because of each other. We still loved each other. We wanted to work things out, make it better. I was on the edge of that until he...
Did you notice anything before Eric passed away?
No, it came out of the blue. If anything, he seemed really, really happy. The only thing that changed was... well...
What was it?
He got into this new habit of looking out the window towards the beach in the mornings. It doesn't sound that odd, but he'd just stare, you know? For a couple of hours at least, just stare at the horizon. like he was looking for something. Then I'd talk to him, and he'd be dazed like I'd just woke him up. It was almost like he was dreaming. I walked up to him once, and his eyes were just glazed over. Once I looked closer, I noticed that his pupils were palpitating. I'm not sure if that's the right word. They were shaking real fast, moving side to side, but in tiny movements. The sort of shaking you wouldn't notice until you got close. One time I got real worried, so I gave him a tap. He looked at me like I wasn't there, and he said this weird thing. What the sea wants, the sea will have. And then his eyes brightened up, like he just woke up.
How'd you find out when he passed away?
Can you give me a moment? It's been 5 years, and it still hurts.
You really don't have to answer if you're not comfortable.
No, it's okay. Let's see. It was Valentine's Day, and we were supposed to meet up for lunch. I was sitting by this coffee shop, and it was one of those sunny days that you don't get in February much, and we had this nice date planned. I was just sitting there, then there was this sudden quiet. Not the coastal kind of quiet, but the kind of quiet you get when something's wrong. You could cut the silence. Then suddenly there's this throng of people piling up on the beach entry. I walked up to the crowd, and there were people that I knew there, and they were all saying, "No, no, no, oh no, 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 no." Just shaking their heads with their mouths open. Then they saw me, and they made these faces, you know, like they knew something terrible was coming up, and they didn't know what to do for me. That's when I sort of knew. I cut through the crowd, and yeah, that's when I saw Eric. He was wearing his blue work overalls, and it clung wet against his skin, seaweed wrapped around his feet. And his face was bloated, blue.
Huh. Did you know the other 4 victims?
No, not at all.
Did you talk to the other families that were affected?
No.
Why is that?
There's really nothing to say, you know? It's terrible, it's really terrible, but there's nothing we can do for each other. All we have are questions that nobody's gonna answer. Why did it happen? How did it happen? Why the 5 of them? All I know is that all of a sudden, 5 people who didn't know each other decided to walk towards the sea. I lived with the questions for a long, long time. It's hard to keep moving on when you have no conclusions, when there's no answers anywhere. Sometimes you just gotta keep living.
Is that why you left Persian Beach?
In a way, yeah. I mean, I loved Peregrine Beach. It had this good village vibe, had this really tight community. But I always felt like it wasn't our town. It was more just Eric's, you know? Everybody loved him up there. Our friends weren't our friends, but were more like just his. And I understand that, I really do. Eric was a top guy, you know? Everyone was really nice and supportive after Eric. Yeah. But it felt like they were less concerned for me than they were just dealing with their own loss. And I could read it in their faces every time. Everyone was a reminder. And it wasn't just people too, it was everything. The sea, the sand, the sun. Eric was way into nature, and he really savoured every little piece of the coast, and those are the things I remember the most about him. I could see the way he smiled every time the sun came up. That swagger he has when he's walking to the beach. It hurt to look at everything.
In the phone call prior to this, you mentioned that there was something you haven't spoken publicly about. You know, regarding the incident. Could you shed some light on that?
It was his face. Its face. His face. He had this smile. But it wasn't Eric's smile. Eric didn't smile like that. It wasn't Eric.
Mary Reed requested that the interview be halted right after the above remarks. She has declined prompts for follow-up comments on this story.